What's up, college football fans? Peter Ariz here alongside D Money, and welcome in to Group Chat Football Live, our daily show talking transfer portal, coaching moves, recruiting, and much more across the country of college football here. And we've got some pretty breaking news here within the last hour or so regarding Bill Belichick and North Carolina D. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about in regards to the Tar Heels today, but we've got to start with this, as it seems like there's a bit of uncertainty regarding Bill Belichick's future. He has not officially signed his contract with North Carolina, not completely uncommon in the coaching world. We saw Coach Moore at Michigan had something similar this year. So this is something that people talk about, and your background as an attorney can kind of get more into the details of certain things like this. But Bill Belichick, he's been out recruiting, but it looks like he might still have an eye on the NFL here.
Yeah, look, a lot of mixed reports here. So he's out recruiting. So looking at his actions, he's out recruiting. He's hiring staff, which we'll talk about in a second. I know there were reports that his delay in hiring staff might have been because he was still looking at the NFL. He's, of course, hired some staff members that we'll talk about here. But this is not totally uncommon to rely on a term sheet in college football before going with the fully executed, fully signed employment contract. So right now, that's where they are. They have a term sheet with the buyout attached. $10 million drops to $1 million after June for the NFL. And then, it's not as formalized into the final employment contract. So we'll see where this goes. Mike Lombardi was on Twitter. That's basically the GM of North Carolina's program. And he was very, very vocal, pushing back on reports from Pro Football Talk and others. Mike Florio saying, look, we are here in college. We're recruiting. We feel good. Pete,
here's the tweet right here. Yeah, Mike Lombardi says, Bill is recruiting in D.C. today and Baltimore tomorrow. His focus is on North Carolina football, hiring staff members, and developing the team. The NFL isn't an option, so please stop making it one. Thank you. So that was one, and that was in response to Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, kind of talking about the report that we were just referencing here. And then I'll go back even more so. An hour ago, Mike Lombardi tweeted, the reception towards UNC and Coach Belichick has been amazing from every school we visit. We are going to fight to keep North Carolina football players here and bring the best to Chapel Hill. So obviously trying to kind of quell any sort of concern from Carolina fans, and more so, I would say, recruits and guys who are just transferring in, or they're still trying to wrap up this transfer class, from worrying about Belichick's future. But I guess we'll see how it plays out here over the next few weeks.
Yeah, again, just to go over some of the terms I used earlier, if I didn't explain them fully. Term sheet, you're talking, you're coming to an agreement, and you come to the key terms of the agreement with some of the legal details to be sorted out later. That happens a lot. You see it when you're settling cases. Maybe it's a very long mediation. Parties are there till, late into the hours of the night, maybe towards midnight, and you say, we got a deal. Let's get a term sheet. Let's sign it. Let's get out of here, and then we'll fill in the rest later and make it really formal with the long, full-blown contract. That's what you have right now between Belichick and UNC. They don't have the full-blown contract yet. That's not totally unusual. It's not like people break these term sheets regularly. There are very much there's room for interpretation with all this stuff. It's very possible that term sheet is enforceable as to the key terms. The key term really being that the buyout is $10 million until June 1st of this year, 2025. Then after June 1st, it drops to $1 million. So from 10 to 1, allowing him to leave. So that's kind of the date to watch. I don't see, obviously these teams are trying to fill in their head coaching vacancy pretty quick. So it's not like there's going to be a lot of NFL head coaching vacancies come June 1st. So I think you can expect Bill Belichick to stick around unless something happens really, really fast here. But it sounds like he's on the road recruiting and hiring staff, which we're going to talk about here in a second, recruiting quarterbacks, which we'll talk about in a second, all of which suggest that he's trying to stick around with UNC, at least for this year. And, give us at least a glimpse as to what this program looks like under Bill Belichick.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Look, it wouldn't be the first time that a coach is out recruiting and hiring staff members while at the same time having an eye elsewhere and getting hired or being in the process of getting hired elsewhere. But you referenced that there have been some additions here, and Bill Belichick adds 2 coaches to his staff, keeping with the theme of bringing a lot of experience to the table. One of them being veteran O-line coach Will Friend, the other one being NFL special teams coach Mike Pryfer, who, this is a great fact here about Coach Pryfer, is that he is the only coach with a win for the Browns in the playoffs in the last 30 years. And you're talking about a guy who had to fill in here for Kevin Stefanski when he had COVID back in 2021. They beat the Steelers in a playoff game. So you add a guy in Pryfer with NFL experience. Special teams coaches kind of fly under the radar a lot of times, but a really important part of the staff. And I think with Belichick always being so big on special teams, this was always going to be someone that had a really extensive background at special teams. And then Will Friend's been all over the place in college football and regarded as a really good recruiter and developer.
Yeah, a lot of people thought that that special teams coach job might go to Joe Judge, who you remember from the NFL, worked with Belichick, then head coach for the Giants. That didn't come to pass. And with Friend, it's interesting because he has no prior ties to Belichick, really not a professional guy at all. He is very much SEC lifer. He played at Alabama, been at Georgia as the offensive line coach, Tennessee, Auburn as the offensive line coach, Mississippi State as offensive line coach. Recently was at Western Kentucky as an offensive coordinator. Didn't have the greatest season at Western Kentucky based on what you're used to seeing from there. Traditionally a pretty explosive offense in the G5 level. Hasn't been that good the past couple of years. So that, he's not being hired to be a offensive coordinator at the end of the day. He's there to be an offensive line coach and somebody with significant experience coaching offensive line at the college level, which is different than the pros. You got less time to work with these guys. The schemes can be different, more varied than what you see at the NFL level. So Belichick clearly, he's had 2 types of hires, right? He's gotten the guys that are NFL oriented, his son, Freddie Kitchens, now here are special teams, but he's also gotten guys, and Mike Lombardi is GM, another NFL guy, but he's also gotten guys with significant ties to the college game.
Armon Hawkins the other day brought him over from Washington.
Yep.
And he's regarded as a big time up and coming recruiter and coach, held a lot of recruiting responsibilities at Washington and worked very closely with Steve Belichick in the secondary there. So if he trusts him and wants to bring him over, then you would think that he believes very much so in his coaching abilities.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this offensive line looks. Offensive line, clearly a position of need. You lost a lot. There's been a lot of action in the portal from UNC, whether it's guys from Holy Cross, guys from Alabama, former big recruits. So he's gotten a kind of a mixture of players that are from smaller levels or from bigger levels that maybe didn't play as much as they hoped to. More towards big bodies, I would say, when you look at the offensive line class in total. Just if they've had some guys that are smaller, like the Holy Cross guy, probably going to play center. But in terms of overall, I think this is a big physical offensive line that he's trying to build. You've heard him in comments talking about, we are trying to build a big offensive line. Size is an important factor. It's not something you necessarily saw in New England, right? New England's offensive lines weren't particularly big.
Versatile, a lot of versatility across those lines, though.
And very well coached as well. But I find it interesting that once he gets to the college game, the size becomes such a premium for him. So again, just going through some of these names that I mentioned that were coming in. Miles McVay, 340-pounder from Alabama, huge. Chad Lindbergh, former Ohio State signee, ends up going to Rice. Big kid from Texas, formerly highly recruited player, 6'6", 315. And I keep mentioning the Holy Cross guy. He does have a name, Christo Kelly, the 6'4", 305-pound center from.
That was his first commit, so we can't forget that name.
Yep. William Boone, who we talked about at length on this show, Prairie View A&M. So a guy from the FCS level, 6'6", 340 pounds. So again, you're seeing a premium on size with the offensive line. Can Will Friend get this big group into a cohesive unit?
Talking about this offensive line, you need that as the foundation. But at the end of the day, you need a quarterback. Still a bit of uncertainty as to who's going to be their starter next year. But it looks like Belichick and Coach Kitchens are kind of locking in on a guy early on here for next recruiting class, and that's Derek Zammit, who was offered last weekend and is now going to be visiting this upcoming weekend here. And this is a guy for the next recruiting class, 4-star recruit out of New Jersey, DePaul Catholic, has offers from Mississippi State, Cincinnati, Duke. I'll pull up the huddle here in a minute. Was in the All-American game the other day, the Under Armour All-American game, and someone who he still has to fill out a bit, but nice combination of some confidence in the pocket, some mobility, and is not afraid to make throws downfield.
Yeah, this is someone I saw at the Under Armour game playing with the older class. Right now in the Under Armour All-Star game, All-America game, you have underclassmen as well as outgoing seniors. So you saw Zammit in that game. I didn't know anything about any UNC interest at that time, but watching him, just going back through my notes, moxie, good mover, made a lot of plays moving around, including rolling left, which you see all over his highlight reel, which we're going to pull up now.
He has a sick throw early in this tape, moving left.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what you saw in the Under Armour game, right? He's not the biggest guy in the world. You saw that in the game when he's with, All-America type players all over the place. He's not going to stand out physically. His arm is okay as far as strength, but it's not, a rocket at this time. But he's accurate. Again, plays with a lot of confidence, a lot of moxie. He's from the New York City area, so he's not a North Carolina kid. But there you go. See him roll left, throwing right on the money. You saw that exact type of thing in the Under Armour game. But going to the New York City area to get a kid who's ranked in the top 25 of quarterbacks. You signed Baker last year, top 10, depending where you look, quarterback in the country, in a loaded 25 quarterback class. So you have some young talent on hand that you're hoping to develop, but you got to sign a quarterback every year at the college level. And, if this is going to be Bill Belichick's first official quarterback signing, the guy, as far as the guy he identified, recruited, ran through the whole process, you could see, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Bailey Zappi, who Bill Belichick had at New England. Not going to wow you with any physical dimensions, but a guy that can get the job done. A guy who was a pretty good athlete, an accurate thrower, around this size. You could just see this guy being very, very productive in the right offense. Again, look at the athleticism and balance there. He's not a runner, but he moves around. And I think in the modern era of college football, modern era of football in general, you want an athlete. The days of the big pocket guy that Belichick had earlier in his career, I don't see that being a successful formula unless they can also move around. This guy can certainly do that. There's a nice throw, outside the hash marks. I don't think that's his forte right now as far as just sitting there and driving the ball. But as he gets bigger and stronger, you'll see more of that. So,
and pretty on brand for Belichick. This guy's the number 25 rated quarterback in the country for next class. So it's not like he's a top 5, top 10 consensus quarterback at this point.
Yeah, but definitely a power 4 guy, right? So it's not like a 0-star out of nowhere guy. Mississippi State with Jeff Lebby, Boston College, Bill O'Brien, another NFL guy, Syracuse, all the success they had with Kyle McCord. Those are some other schools in the mix, which to me makes sense for this kind of player who is not going to be physically a top 10 quarterback on paper, but you could see him developing. And then you look at the, 3 years down the line, you look at the leaderboard, whether he ends up in the ACC or wherever he ends up, and you say, man, this guy's throwing for 3,000 plus yards and winning ball games. He's that kind of college quarterback, which, by the way, if you're Belichick, this is a sign that you're not just looking for the NFL prototype. You're kind of switching your mindset more to who can win games in college for you. Zammit's that type of player.
So from a high school quarterback who's still a year plus away here from playing at the college level to a guy who apparently had the opportunity to make a whole lot of money next season playing college football, and looks like he's passing that up. Well, it's not looks like, he is passing that up. But Quinn Ewers, as reported by Chip Brown, who, from what I understand and I've known for years to be the top Longhorn source out there. Seems like he's always over the coaching, all over the coaching searches and things like that. He says sources, Texas Longhorns quarterback Quinn Ewers turned down an $8 million NIL offer to transfer in deciding to declare for the 2025 NFL draft. And look, he made that official yesterday as it was the deadline to declare for the NFL draft. But how crazy is this news to you, D? A guy who, in Quinn Ewers, that some would say maybe didn't live up fully to his expectations coming out of high school, still obviously an NFL prospect here and should be drafted in the first 2 to 3 rounds. But you had an opportunity, if you're him, to maybe come back, improve your stock similarly to what we're seeing in Carson Beck at Miami. And it looks like Ewers would have made more than double of what Beck is making at Miami. So let's try to make sense of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I find that number hard to believe. I don't question the source, right, as far as, what he's hearing, but that's a huge number when you think about what.
So you think it might be a Ewers camp leak to make him look a little bit better,
to be twice as much as the next closest quarterback? I mean, I wouldn't look. You could say you prefer Ewers over a Carson Beck with the injury and everything, or over, let's say, a John Mateer making that jump from G5 to Power 4. Certainly, Darian Mentz the same thing. But to be twice that number, that to me is hard to believe for somebody that is, again, Quinn Ewers is a very, very good quarterback at the college level, but I wouldn't say he's a dominant player. He's not a Heisman candidate.
That sounds like a number that Cam Ward would have gotten if he had another year of eligibility and came back to school.
Right. Or Cam Newton back
in
the
day. Or Cam Newton.
That's to me a little high, but I had no doubt that he would have been either among the highest or the highest NIL deals if he decided to come back. What was interesting to me in this story was he talked about how he wanted to be remembered as a Longhorn. This is someone who started his career at Ohio State, transferred to Texas before he really played. But he said he wanted to be remembered as a Longhorn, didn't want to sort of sully that by playing for another team, which is interesting because we, in the transfer portal era, one of the things that fans talk about all the time is like, is he going to say our school when it's, Monday Night Football, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying his alma mater. And it seems like a trivial thing, but this is, according to Ewers high school coach who was quoted in this article, that was a factor in his thinking, that he just wanted to be a Longhorn for life. Me personally, I think it's actually a good decision. I don't see his stock going too far up. I think he is what he is. He had a good run in the playoff, didn't finish the way he wanted to, but it's not like he had a terrible run, right, where his stock was plummeting. I think he actually probably helped himself in the college football playoff. He's been injured. He'll get healthier. I think he'll have a good offseason. And the competition is not that tight at quarterback. You got Cam Ward at the top. He'll be the number one pick. So there's, many, many picks after that, right, where people are going to need quarterbacks. And Shedeur Sanders, there's mixed feelings on him in the NFL, according to all reports. Some teams like him, some teams don't. Jackson Dart's someone that we think can make a run up, but I don't think Jackson Dart physically is that much better than Quinn Ewers. I actually think he's probably a little worse physically than Quinn Ewers, less of a pro-style background. So he has a real chance to be the number 3 quarterback in this draft, and maybe even a surprise number 2, depending on how these teams value Shedeur Sanders. You keep hearing reports that he's a polarizing player. So the report from the Longhorns was scouts are saying late first to third. I think if he gets in that second round to first round range, maybe not third, but if you're second round, first round range, that's about where he is as a player. So I think that would be a good move for him to go develop in the pros as opposed to developing in college.
Yeah, and look, as a former agent who used to recruit heavily, in years past, like, and dealing with a lot of guys who make decisions that they have to decide between potentially money or draft and whatnot. There's something to be said if you're Ewers about being a former 5-star recruit, having to come back for a 6th year of college, like you said, has dealt with injuries, and then kind of weighing, man, this has always been my dream. It's right here in front of me. I'm going to get drafted in the first 2 to 3 rounds. At worst case scenario, I would say mid-third round, right? Once this process plays out. So that's a tough thing to pass up no matter what the money looks like there. And Kane's Cats He305 makes a good point. He says long-term, he will make more money staying loyal to Texas, and that's $6 to $8 million, which he may not be wrong about that. If he has good relationships there, and gets into business with certain people later in his career, then later in his career, what am I saying? He can probably get into business now with these guys. Yep. So I do see that, and I respect the kid for it. Now, again, like you said, could this be some leakage going on by his camp potentially? But it's a cool decision if it is true, because you gotta commend him going out and trying to chase his dreams.
And you've heard reports that Ewers, he doesn't come from a background where money might be the biggest concern for him. So, everybody, like, money's a concern for everybody, but it's not like a super pressing need based on what you hear about yours and his family, his background.
He was sorry to cut you off, but
Yep.
he was the early, I mean, he had like that $1 million NIL deal, like right when, like the day or 2 days after NIL became legal, right? So like he was the first one maybe to have $1 million NIL deal. So he's not new to money.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer, and we talked about it a lot. Experience for the NFL is paramount. The amount of games, the amount of throws, you want to maximize that number before you get to the pros. But yours does. He already has 37 games played, over 9,000 yards, over 68 or over 60 touchdowns, 68 to be exact. So he's played a ton of football. He started a lot of games at a very high level of football. I don't think, more experience certainly doesn't hurt, but he's not like a Mitch Trubisky or an Anthony Richardson that doesn't have very much experience before he enters the NFL draft. I think he's got plenty, and now it's time to develop in a pro system, get his body right. I don't see him as a day one starter no matter where he goes. But if you take him next, let's say, just thinking out loud, some of the older starters in the league, Matt Stafford, something like that, where they might want to pick another player in the first round, but then the second round, you build behind your veteran quarterback and draft that heir apparent that doesn't play right away. A situation like that, pick the name of any older quarterback that's not going to be around too long. I think slotting yours behind a guy like that makes a lot of sense.
So getting to a program here that I feel like we spoke about a lot in the beginning of the portal process, but the last few weeks it's been on the quieter side, and that is Florida State. But we're talking about them today as they flipped center Samman Thompson from FIU. This is a 3-star who at one point was actually committed to Oregon as well. So very, very interesting recruitment here. He committed to Oregon, then FIU, then lands, these days somewhere in the middle of FIU and Oregon at FSU, but an FSU program that offensive line has been a big need. He's a center and going to need to put some good weight on, a bit on the smaller side. Played both sides of the ball, quick, good athlete, and someone that I know FIU was really hoping they could hold on to with this transition staff.
Yeah, a real name, Chavez Thompson. So Samman Thompson, 6'1", 310. By the way, this is a 2025 commit. We're talking recruiting here. Most of the time we talk recruiting this time of year, it's going to be for that 2026 class, because all these early kids, it used to be the early signing period. Now it's really the signing period for 2025. Most of the players that are relevant have signed at that early December period. But this is one of the rare exceptions where a big-time program is landing a player for the 2025 class, a scholarship player. So it's a 2025 player, 6'1", 310 from Cocoa, Florida. That's on Florida's Space Coast. It is one of the powerhouses in the state of Florida, year in, year out. 3-star player, former wrestler. He is a wrestler. I think he's going to continue at wrestling through this spring season here, but he is a district champion wrestler. Offensive line coaches love wrestlers because of their leverage, because of the way they can use their hips, their strength, their work ethic, their tenacity. He shows all that on film. 3-star player. The connection, Herb Hand, UCF's former offensive line coach, now moved on to Florida State, recruited Thompson while he was at UCF. You hear the coach from Thompson, that Coach Hand, that's my guy. The relationship we built throughout my high school career is what led me to FSU. So you see that come to pass. Former defensive tackle as well. So he played on both sides of the ball. He's an athlete like that. If you're FSU, you lose Maurice Smith, who was your longtime center, the Miami Central graduate who played for a long, long time. Undersized, but a guy who played on some good lines, played on some not so good lines as well. He's gone. Luke Pettibon from Wake Forest. That's a 1-year transfer to sort of bridge from Maurice Smith to whoever comes next. Samman Thompson could be that guy who, after the bridge tenure of Pettibon, takes over at center and really adds some physicality and juice to the unit and plays the way that Coach Hand wants to operate.
And you see him making plays here against Miami Northwestern. It looks like, he was playing in the state championship as a defensive player as well. So that he's not going to play D tackle at the collegiate level, but that gives you some hope that skill set can kind of play well at center for him.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all. You see the flexibility and the quickness. This is real football, man. We talk about Coco. This is a program that is perennially good. He's originally from Melbourne, Florida, also on the Space Coast, but not as much of a powerhouse program. Iugali, it's a French name. I can't really pronounce it, but pretty decent school. Produced Robert Stafford, who's now UCLA recently, but nothing like Coco. So this senior year, he got a lot more big-time football experience going against some of the top defensive lines in the state of Florida and some of the top offensive lines, as you could see when he plays on the defensive side of the ball. So look, if you compare him to like a Maurice Smith, who he potentially would replace down the line, I think just the size and physicality, not the height necessarily, but he's going to be a wider, more powerful player than Smith was. Smith really was more of an athletic center, undersized guy, played left tackle at Central, really developed physically into a starting center at the ACC level, but never had that great size and power. I think Thompson, over time, could be a more physically imposing player than they had with Smith.
Yeah, and that FSU offensive line was, listen, it's hard to pinpoint what the worst unit was for Florida State this year, but that was a really bad unit. And if it would have been better, maybe would have masked some more things. Coach Norvell really wants to rely on the run game, but he couldn't do that very much last year with as bad as that was. So Chavez is not the only addition recently here. And again, he's a high school recruit, but in the portal, they had a couple big pickups here. Luke Pettibon from Wake Forest. I think you mentioned him earlier, but that was a big one for them. And then Gunnar Hansen, to me, was the biggest pickup potentially this whole cycle for them.
Yeah, they've remade that offensive line with veterans. Herb Hand's going to get his chance to mold it the way he wants. Obviously, the running game is different than what Norvell had so much success with at Memphis and in recent years at Florida State. So it's a whole different type of offense. Gus Malzahn is going to leave his imprint. So he's going to need offensive linemen that do what he wants to do. He runs a ton of power. He has those guys moving around. It's going to be interesting to see how they adapt. But going to Florida State's offensive line, because you brought it up, and I think this is a point that's under discussed when it comes to Florida State. We talk so much about DJU and how he was a disappointment, right? Or maybe how the defensive line didn't perform up to what people thought it might. The wide receivers, struggled to get open and separate. To me, the biggest issue with FSU and the reason why they went from the top of the ACC 2-2-10 was the offensive line. I mean, you look at their running game. They were 132nd in the nation in running. 131st in sack percentage, meaning the amounts of dropbacks that result in sacks. Both of those stats are FBS opponents only. So you could make a case that this was the worst offensive line in the country. I mean, statistically, they're right there near the bottom in the two major categories reflecting offensive line play. The other teams in the mix, your Kent States, your Colorados, not teams you want to be compared to when it comes to offensive line play. So I think of all the issues that FSU had, it was the offensive line. And it's puzzling because they brought back experience, but it just, for whatever reason, whether it was not having the most mobile quarterback, not having some of the skill position guys, the offensive line's play just deteriorated, or at least they got more exposed. So I think FSU was smart to press the reset button on that position and say, listen, whatever we've been doing doesn't work. We need to do something different. We need to bring in fresh blood, both from the transfer portal level and then also the high school level. And they're doing that with Samman Thompson.
Canes Cats Heat. He might be a little biased, but he says that FSU is looking like a 4-win team. I think that their floor is raised big time this year.
Yeah, I think FSU, and we'll get into all of this over the course of the offseason as we really see this portal season end, because it's not over yet. You still got the post-spring portal window, and we'll see how this all shakes out. But to me, FSU has raised their floor tremendously because of what they've done on the offensive line, the change in defensive coordinator, some of the more familiar faces that Coach White added on the defensive side of the ball. I think they'll be better there, more consistent, maybe not as talented from an NFL standpoint, but more consistent. They did bring back Darrell Jackson, which will help tremendously from an NFL talent standpoint. Elijah
and you're
Herring.
Building the offense around Castellanos, which was not the case for him at BC this last year.
Yeah, and it fits, right? A Gus Malzahn offense with a quarterback that likes to run. You've improved the receiving core. Deuce Robinson, Squirrel White, he can get downfield. So do I see this being a 10-11 win ceiling? Probably not. Although when FSU broke through the first time, I don't think people expected that from FSU. So I wouldn't count it out. But I think what you're seeing is an elevated floor because just the running game improvements and just the ability of Thomas Castellanos to run in a system that fits him, I think will keep them in much more games and just give them a higher floor. They'll steal games because of this unusual style of offense, the no huddle, the tempo, and of course, the fact that the quarterback is able to do what is required in this offense. Receiving core will be improved. I don't see this being a dynamic passing offense, but Squirrel White can get downfield in a hurry. Deuce Robinson can make contested catches. I think it'll all work together to improve the floor at a minimum. Maybe not, again, maybe not building a national championship type formula with just the way the talent is put together, but you're elevating your floor and you're going to be a very tough team to play at the ACC level.
So sticking with the high school offensive lineman here, big pickup for Illinois for the 2026 class as the top recruit in the state of Nebraska commits to the Illini, and that's Landon Von Segern. Interior offensive lineman, looks really athletic. Brett Bielema, you saw him stirring it up with Beamer in the bowl game. You see that smile on his face in the picture here. He's probably going to send this on a postcard to Matt Rule and Nebraska. So they're going to Nebraska, get the top player in the state. Not sure if he was a priority for the Cornhuskers at this point, but it's still a big deal when you go into someone else's state and get the top-rated player. And Brett Bielema, when it comes to offensive linemen, we're going to take his word for it.
Yep, 6 senior offensive linemen on that 25 roster, which is great for that year's team. This year's team for Illinois is going to be a hot sleeper in the Big Ten, but you need to constantly be reloading. And if you're an offensive line-focused program, you always got to be bringing in talent. Von Segern, I really like what I see on film. Not the tallest guy in the world. Of course, he's playing left tackle at the high school level, which is not what he's going to be playing at the college level, most likely because of his height at 6'3", 280. But he is extremely athletic. And you watch his huddle, everything is in space. Everything is out there, moving around, hitting smaller targets. And he's very fluid, very athletic. You see him here getting to the second level, just plowing that linebacker. And he does it time and time again when you watch his highlight reel. Again, the finish is there, but this is not like a phone booth brawler. This is an athletic dude that they're projecting him as guard. I could also see center with him just because of the athleticism. You see him at left tackle again. I don't think this is where he's going to live, but look how far out he gets. And he looks under control. He's able to change directions. Boom, deliver the hit. One thing about these offensive linemen in high school, yes, they're bigger. There you see, look at that.
Oof.
And then he gets out there and gets in front. With these offensive linemen that are bigger, something that is actually harder to do is hit the small targets sometimes when they're in
like
space.
that right there.
Right. But he does that. And I think it shows you his fluidity and coordination because he's not just like leaning into these guys are getting in the way. He's squaring his shoulders and delivering a jolt, which tells you that he has the coordination and balance to be out there and stop and aim and then fire. Boom, you see it again. I mean, that's a direct shot to a much smaller player. So it's not about, he's going against a smaller player, but those guys are hard to locate more so than the power aspect. So you see my left tackle, maybe he's a guy that can fill in there. I think the length will be an issue at that position. But in high school, your best athlete is usually playing left tackle anyway. So you're encouraged that he plays out there. Millard South High School, Omaha, Nebraska, state champion. And we talked about this a little bit, Pete. Unusual to me that the number 1 rated player in Nebraska, and this is on 3's ranking. I think 247 has him a little lower, but still a top 5 player in Nebraska. Why is Nebraska not in the mix here? You see Kansas, you see Iowa, which is an offensive line factory. You see Kansas State, of course, Illinois, but you don't see Nebraska.
Is that a competition thing potentially? I'm not familiar enough, unfortunately, with the high school football in his division there.
State champion team. Yeah. But look, Nebraska, to their credit, they landed the top 5 players or four of the top 5 players in Nebraska last year. Chase Lofton went to FSU, the tight end, but that's pretty good. So it's not like they're ignoring the state. This is an interesting one to watch. If I'm Nebraska, I'm saying, what are we missing here? When an offensive line coach like Brett Bielema makes this guy a priority, that offensive line coach who led the recruitment, Bart Miller, Omaha native. So that was the time. You hear the quotes from Von Segern. He's saying, with Coach Miller, the O-line's been electric. Not usually what you hear associated with offensive line play, electricity. But he said, especially when they played South Carolina, they shut down the freshman defensive end, Dylan Stewart. So clearly, Bielema is making an impression with the offensive line play. and he's going to be on the hunt for offensive linemen, losing that many seniors. So good start for the Illini, and an interesting battle shaping up in the Big Ten for recruits in the Plains region, because Illinois doesn't have to just stick to Illinois. They can go out there in the Plains and go toe-to-toe with some of these teams and land very, very productive players.
Good momentum for them too, man. Finish the season the way they did, 10 wins. Luke Altmaier coming back at quarterback. And that's just in general, like, that program seems to fit Brett Bielema very well. You know, he went and he did the SEC thing. I see him being there, you know, unless an unforeseen offer comes, which could always happen. But I see him being a mainstay there for a while.
Yeah, it's a good fit. It's a good fit, and an offensive line-based program makes a lot of sense. I use this quote for Jim Harbaugh. He said, offensive line is the only position that doesn't rely on any other position on the offense, but everybody relies on it, meaning a quarterback needs line play. He needs receivers. He needs running back. The running back needs holes to run through. The wide receivers need someone to throw to, or to throw to them. Offensive line is going to do their job regardless of who's around. And then once they do their job, they make everybody else's life easier. So if you're building a program, it makes sense to start with offensive line because they are not dependent on everybody else. They can make everybody else better. You see that in Detroit. That's an offensive line-driven offense, now one of the most explosive offenses in the National Football League. Philadelphia Eagles, same thing. So it makes a lot of sense to start your program inside out with the offensive line because it's going to allow guys like Luke Altmaier to have success. Illinois had tremendous wide receivers, both probably on their way to the NFL, and Brian and Franklin. The offensive line made that more possible. So on brand for the Illini to get an offensive lineman early, a priority offensive lineman. I think given what they're losing in 25, this is going to be a theme of the class.
Brandon asking us, will y'all have shows like this on baseball across the country too? And Canes Cats Heat 305 says, I wish, Brandon. Look, it's Group Chat Sports, man. So we have a lot of stuff coming on this page. Right now we're focused on the daily show here that we're doing, Group Chat Football Live. The support from you guys has been awesome, and connecting with, you know, fans all across the country has been really fun, learning about, you know, different programs more in depth. So we're going to keep bringing the coverage here on Group Chat Football Live, but stay tuned, man. We have a lot of different things coming on this page on Group Chat Sports. So remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel because it's the only way you'll be staying in the loop and stay updated with everything that we're doing.
And look, never say never. I see I'm wearing the baseball shirt here, Florida Marlins. So
I didn't say never. I just said, look, we got some stuff coming.
Big baseball fan. I was actually at Miami Hurricanes baseball practice yesterday. We were able to see Nick Robert throw, Alex Giroux, a couple Jackson Cleveland. So got a little look at some of the next arms for the Miami Hurricanes. Of course, the Cuvée was there, some of the top sluggers in the ACC. So it'll be fun to watch. I'll be watching college baseball very closely. So if the people want it, that's definitely something we could do. Let us know in the comments if you want to do some college baseball stuff. We're still learning what the audience wants. And look, excited for college baseball. It's a sport that's really taken off in a huge way from where it was 10 years ago.
All right, guys. Once again, like this video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in.